I'm Jenna, 34, book editor, lover of quiet cafes, first editions, and red wine with too much oak. I don't usually talk about my family, but if you knew what happened at my brother's wedding last spring, you'd understand why I'm telling this now. My grandfather flew 6 hours to be there. He's 81, recovering from a mild heart condition, and still insisted on making the trip from Seattle to Colorado to see Zach, my younger brother, get married. I hadn't planned on attending. Zach and I barely speak anymore, and my mother Meredith is the kind of woman who'd rather throw away a chipped heirloom than admit something isn't perfect. I'd moved out at 19 and never really looked back. But when Grandpa Walter called me personally and said, "You're the only one who remembers what this family was before all the polish," I booked a ticket. Just for him. I arrived at the Aspen Ridge Resort on a windy afternoon in late May. Everyone looked like they'd just stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Designer sunglasses rented Tesla's champagne glasses that clinked without purpose. I wore a navy wrap dress I'd had for years, the hem slightly frayed. My mother glanced at it once and said, "Charming." That was all. Zach didn't acknowledge me. Too busy playing the role of charming groom-to-be, entertaining some venture capital guy near the fire pits. His fiancée Aubrey smiled at me like I was a stranger passing hors d'oeuvres. Then Grandpa arrived. He stepped out of a rideshare, not a limousine, wearing the same gray wool coat he's worn for over a decade. One button missing, tie askew. But his eyes lit up the second he saw me. "You came," he said, voice a little thinner than I remembered, but no less certain. "You always show up." I hugged him tightly, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. That's when I noticed something strange. A staff member approached and led him away. Not toward the family seating area near the ceremony arch, but around the corner past the kitchen patio. I followed quietly, unsure of what I was witnessing. Then I saw it. A single white plastic chair placed behind the catering tent next to two large half-full trash bins. The smell of spoiled oysters clung to the air. There was no shade, no view, just heat vents and humming flies. I turned toward my mother, who was arranging flowers at a nearby table. "Why is Grandpa sitting there?" I asked, my voice low. She didn't even look at me when she said, "Because that old man refuses to stay where he belongs. And frankly, he smells like an old bookshop. He'll embarrass us." When I objected, she turned to me calm as winter ice and slapped me across the face. The world blurred for a second. Then she hissed, "Leave. Now." I left. But 20 minutes later, something unbelievable happened. A jet landed near the property. And what came next changed everything. I didn't drive straight to the airport after she slapped me. I could have. The Uber was already on its way. But I sat down on a stone bench near the staff parking lot instead, just behind a row of weeping spruce trees. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I felt something pressing behind my eyes like a storm threatening to break. I stared down at my heels, dirt smudged on the suede from the gravel paths. I'd worn them mostly for Grandpa. He always said, "Don't dress up for people, dress up for respect," especially self-respect. Growing up in our family didn't teach me much about love, but it taught me everything about silence. We didn't yell in our house, no one slammed doors, no one raised voices. But cruelty lived in the quiet, the pauses, the turned backs, the ignored questions. My mother Meredith believed in appearances. She wore pearls to brunch and kept her nails done even on snow days. She referred to problems as unsuitable moments. My father Gregory was a financial advisor who acted like his greatest achievement was marrying her. He let her take the lead in most things, including how to treat me. Then there was Zach, my little brother, born 5 years after me when my mother had almost given up on having a second child. He was her miracle, her golden boy. If he spilled juice, the glass was flawed. If he got suspended from school for plagiarizing a paper in 10th grade, she said the teacher was threatened by his intelligence. And me, I was the sensitive one, the moody one, the girl who read too much, didn't wear makeup, and refused to go into finance. I got into Berkeley with a scholarship. No one came to move me in. Grandpa did. He flew down with a suitcase full of snacks and a hand-stitched blanket Grandma had made before she passed. When I graduated, he showed up with flowers. My parents mailed a card 2 weeks later. It was unsigned. After college, I took a job in publishing and stayed in California. My mother told everyone I worked with books like I was volunteering at a used bookstore, rather than working as an editor for a mid-size but respected imprint. Every call home felt like a performance review. Still single, still renting, still editing other people's words. Over time, the calls stopped, but Grandpa never stopped. Every birthday, he'd send me a letter, handwritten. Every Christmas, he'd ship a small box with a paperback I hadn't read and a tin of cookies from a bakery in Seattle. Every time I visited, maybe once a year, he'd pick me up from the airport himself. And when I got passed over for a promotion last fall, he was the only one who said, "You deserve better. Don't shrink yourself to fit into small rooms." Zach, meanwhile, had raised $2 million in funding for some kind of fitness app that let people track the rhythm of their heartbeats during meditation. Or something. I never fully understood it. But everyone else applauded like he'd split the atom. Aubrey, his fiancée, was beautiful, bright, and said things like, "We believe in brand authenticity over coffee." I wasn't invited to the bridal shower or the engagement dinner, but I got a group email with the registry link. When Grandpa called 2 weeks before the wedding and said, "Will you come?" I hesitated. "I don't think they want me there." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Well, I do, and I still count." So I bought a dress, packed my bag, took a few vacation days. At the rehearsal dinner, I was seated next to the resort's junior event planner. I wasn't on the family table. My name was misspelled on the name card. I didn't complain. I ate my salad. I smiled politely. I kept my voice low. Then I saw them lead Grandpa to the back past the heater vents and garbage bins, and something inside me snapped. I stood up, walked to my mother, asked the question, and got slapped for it. She'd always been good at that, punishing the truth while dressing it in pearls. As I sat now behind the spruce trees away from the music and champagne, I felt the burn still lingering on my cheek. I texted Grandpa. I typed and erased a dozen versions before sending, "I'm sorry. I tried." No reply. I looked up and saw the clouds shift over the mountains. Aspen Ridge sat like a jewel against the hills, but it always felt cold to me. Something about the way everything was perfectly placed made it feel sterile, like a house stage for sale. It wasn't home. It never had been. I had a home once, a place with creaky floors and lilac bushes, and a kitchen that always smelled like soup. Grandpa's place. It used to be a small property just outside of Seattle, part farmhouse, part greenhouse. He grew tomatoes in the summer and pressed cider in the fall. My mother called it the shack and only visited for appearances. She didn't like that it reminded people of where we came from, of who we were before money, before Father's firm took off, before Zach became the golden child. She especially didn't like that Grandpa refused to sell it. "I'll leave it to whoever remembers where the key is kept," he'd joke. I remembered. It was taped under the third brick from the left next to the porch light. When I turned 29, I visited alone and found him pruning the apple trees with arthritic hands. "You should sell this place," I'd said, meaning it practically. He looked at me with steady eyes. "And then what?" Let them rewrite everything I hadn't known what he meant. Not fully, but I think I'm starting to now. Back at the resort, the music had shifted. Softer now. Classical strings, the sound of silverware against china. The wedding was about to start. I stood slowly brushing gravel from my skirt. The Uber driver messaged me again. Then I heard it. A low rumble in the distance. Not a car, not a motorcycle, something deeper. It echoed off the hills like thunder. I turned toward the sound confused. A few staff members had stepped out from the kitchen and were looking up. Then I saw it. A black, jet-sleek Silent descending behind the ridge. My phone buzzed. A text from Grandpa. "Don't leave yet." And that's when I realized this wasn't over. I should have left. Every part of me wanted to call the driver, roll my suitcase back up the hill, and disappear before anyone noticed I was missing. But something about that message, "Don't leave yet," held me still. My fingers hovered over the reply button, but I didn't write back. Instead, I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned back toward the resort past the trees and the staff entrance. I didn't go far, just enough to see the edge of the rehearsal dinner through the glass walls of the reception hall. People were clinking glasses, laughing in those crisp, controlled ways that sounded expensive. The kind of laughter that fills space without really meaning anything. Aubrey's mother was giving a toast. Her voice carried through the open doors, sweet and rehearsed, full of glowing adjectives for her future son-in-law. The family table was beautifully set, gold-rimmed plates, custom calligraphy place cards, candlelight flickering against tall glasses of white wine. Every seat was filled with someone whose opinion my mother cared about. Investors, business partners, the family doctor, a judge who golfed with my father every other Saturday. I looked for Grandpa. He wasn't there. I scanned the far edges of the patio and finally spotted him still in that plastic chair, still next to the garbage bin, still alone. He looked tired, not just physically. There was something in the way he sat that made him look smaller, as if years had folded in on him during the last hour. A plate of untouched food rested on his lap. No napkin, no drink, just lukewarm chicken and a dry roll. I stepped through the patio gate without thinking. "Excuse me," I said to a passing waiter. "Can I borrow that?" He looked confused, but handed me the stem of a wine glass. I tapped it gently with a butter knife I'd taken from the nearby catering tray. The sound was small at first, a tiny ping. Then again. Louder. Conversations paused. Heads turned. I cleared my throat. My heart beat so loudly, I thought I might hear it through the mic stand. But there was no mic. Just my voice and a brittle kind of courage. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "But I have a question." Silence stretched. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed lightly. Why is my grandfather seated next to the trash bins while strangers are at the family table? A slow murmur moved through the crowd like wind passing through dry leaves. I didn't look at my mother at first. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of her stare cutting through the space between us. She stood up slowly, napkin still in hand. Her heels tapped once, twice on the stone patio as she approached. Then, without warning, her hand struck my face. The sound cracked across the air like a firework. A collective gasp rose around us. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You don't belong here." I didn't speak. My cheek burned. My eyes stung. She turned to a nearby staff member. "Escort her out. Now." The young man hesitated, clearly unsure, but a nod from my father, who still hadn't said a word, was all it took. He stepped forward. I didn't fight. I just walked. Slow. Steady. My heels caught once on the uneven gravel, but I didn't stumble. Zach looked away. Aubrey blinked in confusion, but said nothing. My father adjusted his tie and stared at his drink. But then Grandpa stood up. Not quickly. Not with drama. He just rose, straightened his coat, and began walking in my direction. He met me halfway silent. As the crowd turned away, already resuming their wine and chatter, he pressed something into my hand. A folded piece of cloth. Green. Sought a handkerchief. I looked down and saw the initials stitched in silver thread. W.E.H. Walter Ernest Harrow. His full name. He closed my fingers around it without a word. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just fabric, like it carried history. "Go to the bench," he said quietly, "and wait." I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. As I stepped past the back entrance and returned to the bench by the spruce trees, I sat down again. This time I didn't feel humiliated. I felt angry. Not loud, explosive anger. No. This was quieter, colder. The kind that settles deep into your spine and refuses to melt. They'd done it again. All these years, all the silence, all the ways I tried to prove myself, all the moments I thought maybe this time would be different. But it wasn't. My mother had thrown me out not because I embarrassed her, but because I reminded her of what she had buried. Grandpa had always seen it, and now I understood why he came. Not for Zach, not for the vows or the toast or the catering. He came for the reckoning. Behind me, the sky began to shift, a gray dusk pulling itself over the trees. The music from the reception grew distant. Then I heard the low, unmistakable hum again, not from the speakers or the kitchen, from the air. A jet engine. Soft at first, then louder. I stood. Out beyond the tree line, the road that curved along the backside of the resort glowed with headlights. A sleek black Rolls-Royce crept forward, its paint catching the last light of day. Behind it, a procession of SUVs, silent, powerful, followed like a slow-moving tide. One of the catering staff came outside to smoke and froze mid-step when he saw the cars. The Rolls-Royce came to a gentle stop at the edge of the property. The chauffeur stepped out, walked briskly to the back and opened the door. And out stepped Grandpa, but not the man who'd arrived earlier in a wrinkled coat and crooked tie. This man stood tall, composed. He wore a navy suit tailored to fit his lean frame, polished shoes that shone even in the shadows, and sunglasses that reflected nothing but sky. He looked like someone out of a magazine ad for wealth you never talk about. I blinked. The same man they'd sat beside garbage bins was now stepping out of a luxury vehicle with a team of security behind him. He turned toward me, raised his hand slightly in greeting. I stepped forward. "What is this?" I asked, voice caught somewhere between disbelief and awe. He smiled, not kindly, but with something sharper. "This," he said, "is what they forgot." And then without another word, he offered me his arm. We walked toward the reception hall. I don't remember every step we took. Only the sound of his cane tapping against the stone path, and the hush that seemed to follow in his wake. It was strange how people moved aside without being asked, like some unspoken law had returned to the room. As we approached the edge of the patio, I could see inside the reception space again. Laughter, toasts, clinking glasses, oblivious to what was coming. Grandpa slowed down just before the threshold. He looked at me and said, "You don't have to go back in." But I did. I wasn't there for revenge, not the kind they expected. I wasn't going to yell or cry or plead to be accepted. I was just going to be there, stand there, and let the truth do what it does best, unravel everything fake. The doors to the reception were wide open now, the music drifting gently out. A quartet played near the fireplace. My mother's voice floated above the melody, amplified by the microphone in her hand. "And I want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate Zach's accomplishments. We are so proud of the man he's become." She beamed chin high. One hand rested gracefully on Zach's shoulder. He stood tall, champagne in hand, looking exactly like the version of a son she always wanted. Then Grandpa walked in. There was no announcement, no trumpet, just the soft fall of expensive shoes against expensive stone. But somehow everything stopped. The music, the laughter, even the air. My mother froze mid-sentence. Her mouth hung open slightly, as if the words forgot how to form. Zach turned slowly. His eyes widened. I saw it then, the flicker of fear. Grandpa didn't raise his voice, didn't stride or posture. He simply moved forward with quiet control, as if he'd always belonged at the center of this room, and had merely stepped out for a moment. I stayed back by the wall of potted olive trees. I didn't need to be beside him. I just needed to be present. He reached the edge of the low stage where the quartet had paused their song. Without asking, he extended his hand toward the microphone in my mother's grip. She didn't move at first. Then she let go. The room held its breath. Grandpa looked around, eyes sharp and unflinching. "I wasn't going to speak tonight," he began, his voice clear and steady. "Didn't want to ruin the mood." A few nervous chuckles scattered the silence, but no one really laughed. But then I sat beside a trash bin while people I've never met toasted my grandson, without even noticing I was there. He glanced at the crowd, and for the first time that night, no one looked proud. No one clinked glasses. "I built the company that paid for this wedding," he continued. "I signed the check for this venue. I kept this family afloat when the market collapsed. And yet, I wasn't on the guest list." A gasp somewhere near the back. The woman next to Aubrey's mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I wasn't invited," he said simply. My name wasn't even on the family seating chart. My father stood up slightly, lips parted like he might say something. But Grandpa didn't stop. "I found my seat next to old shrimp shells in a bucket of ice water. And not one of you, not even my son, thought to ask why." He turned slightly, eyes now on Zach. "But someone did. Jenna did. She noticed. She spoke up. And for that, she was thrown out." He let the silence settle. It wasn't angry, just weighty. I've watched this family forget its roots, he said. Forget its people. Forget what dignity looks like. Then he looked toward me, just once, and said, "But not everyone forgot." I felt heat rush to my face. My fingers tightened around the handkerchief in my pocket. "I'm not here to scold Grandpa," continued. "I'm 81. I don't have time for lectures." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "But I do have time for clarity." He turned toward the officiant, who had just returned to his podium, clearly confused, and handed him the envelope. "This wedding," Grandpa said calmly, "will not proceed." A sound spread across the room like a ripple. Some disbelief, some curiosity, some dawning terror. My mother stepped forward, face flushed. "You can't do this," she snapped. "This is not your event." Grandpa looked at her not with anger, but pity. "Meredith, everything here was paid for with my account." He motioned toward the lawyer who had just walked in quietly behind him. "And the paperwork was filed last week." The officiant opened the envelope. His hand shook slightly. Inside was a certified statement revoking all contractual ties between the family trust and the wedding expenses. The venue, the catering, everything. "What does this mean?" Aubrey asked suddenly, her voice cracking. "It means," Grandpa said, "we pause." He turned to Zach. "You locked your sister out of your life because it was convenient. You let your mother erase her. You stood silent when she was hurt. And that silence speaks louder than any toast." Zach's jaw clenched. "This isn't about Jenna." "No," Grandpa interrupted. "It's about who you became while I wasn't looking." Then he faced the crowd. "I'm not canceling love," he said, "but I'm refusing to bless a union built on pretense. This family needs repair before it earns the right to celebrate anything." He handed the microphone to the officiant, and stepped down. A heavy hush hung over the room. No one dared move. Zach looked at Aubrey, then at our parents, then at me. But he didn't speak. He just stood there, caught between denial and collapse. My mother opened her mouth to protest again. But this time, Grandpa held up a hand. "No more lies," he said. "No more masks." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Because truth was already doing what truth always does, clearing the air. Grandpa looked at me as he walked past toward the garden doors. "Come," he said. "It's time." And just like that, the wedding was over. We didn't go far. Grandpa led me through the side garden, away from the frozen silence of the reception. The guests remained inside, too stunned to leave, too embarrassed to speak. I could feel their eyes on us, even behind the glass. Past the fire pits and down the curved stone steps, there was a quiet sitting area surrounded by mountain laurel. The kind of place that was probably added for aesthetics, but rarely used. We sat there, just the two of us, the air cool and still around us. He exhaled slow and long. "I didn't plan to do this today," he said, looking straight ahead. "But then I saw what they did to you. And I realized I should have done it a long time ago." I didn't speak. I waited. "There's something you don't know," he continued, "about the family, about the trust, about how it all really works." He reached into his coat pocket again, this time pulling out a larger folder, thicker with tabs and signatures poking out at the edges. "I set up the family estate trust decades ago," he said, "back when your father and Meredith were still finding their footing. I believed in building something to pass down." He handed the folder to me. My fingers hesitated before taking it. "For years, I let your father manage most of the logistics. He was careful, strategic. At least I thought so. But then 3 years ago, something changed." I looked at him. "That was when you got sick." He nodded. "Heart episode. Minor, but enough to keep me in the hospital for a few nights. That's when Meredith made her move." "What move?" He paused, jaw tightening. "She had an affidavit drawn up, one that claimed I was mentally declining. Early stage dementia, unfit to manage the trust. She got it signed by an old colleague of hers, a doctor I hadn't seen in over 10 years. My stomach dropped. She had power of attorney filed in court the following week," he said. "Without telling me. Without telling anyone outside the family. Suddenly, all my decisions were void. The assets I'd protected were now under her control." "But that's not legal," I whispered. "It was just legal enough to hold up," he said. "Until I hired a lawyer. A good one. someone who believed in paper trails. He tapped the folder. I had already created a backup trust, quietly, one that transferred controlling interest of the estate to someone else. My throat tightened. To you, he said softly. I froze. Why? He looked at me, eyes fierce and tender all at once. Because when I was sick, when no one else visited, when your mother said she was too busy, when your father forgot what room I was in, you showed up. The memory hit me like a gust of cold wind. I had driven 6 hours through a snowstorm to reach the hospital, sat with him through the night, brought books, fed him soup. I hadn't thought it was heroic, just human. I changed the documents the day after you left that hospital, he said. I never told you, because I didn't want it to become a target. I opened the folder slowly. Legal documents notarized stamped. My name, Jenna Elise Harrow, typed across the top of several pages. You own 49% of the family holding company, he said. Enough to block decisions. Enough to change them. And this, he handed me a separate envelope thinner. This is the deed to the land, the resort, the cabins, the whole ridge. I stared at the page, reading it once then again. But they said... My voice broke. They lied, he said gently. They erased you from the family narrative because they were afraid of what you'd inherit, afraid you'd hold a mirror to them. I sat back, letting the weight of it settle. I thought I was just... Not enough, I admitted. Not the right kind of daughter, not the kind of sister anyone talks about at parties. He turned toward me. You weren't the failure, Jenna, he said. You were the threat. The wind stirred slightly, rustling the laurel behind us. I always believed if I stayed quiet, I'd earn my way back in, I said. If I proved I was useful or at least polite, they'd let me belong again. They didn't want to belong with you, he replied. They wanted you to disappear quietly. I looked down at the folder in my lap. The papers were crisp. The ink was dark and firm. It was all real. So why now, I asked? Because they crossed a line, he said. They didn't just disrespect me. They humiliated you. Publicly. Without shame. And they did it thinking there would be no consequence. I let out a slow breath. My heart was pounding in this quiet, detached way, like it knew something big had shifted, even if the rest of me hadn't caught up yet. Grandpa stood slowly. I'm not here to burn the house down, he said, but I am here to make sure they can't board up the truth. He looked back at the reception hall. They wanted this wedding to be a spectacle, he said. Let's give them a real one. I blinked. What are you going to do? Nothing, he said. You are. He walked back toward the hall, leaving me with the folder, the deed, and a choice. I sat there for several minutes alone with the wind and the weight of a legacy I hadn't asked for. But maybe I was the right person for it. Not because I was the loudest, but because I was still standing, and now I had the truth. I returned to the reception with the folder clutched to my chest. Inside, the air had changed. The chatter was subdued now. Eyes darted whispered questions, hung in corners, and glasses sat untouched. The illusion was breaking, and in that space between shock and shame, there was room for truth. Grandpa was standing at the head table again, speaking quietly with a man in a charcoal suit who looked vaguely familiar. When he saw me enter, he gave a small nod, then stepped aside. The man turned and faced the crowd. My name is Leonard Grayson, he said, voice calm but firm. I'm legal counsel for the Harrow estate. My mother stiffened. We've just filed the final transfer documents for the Harrow Trust, he continued. Effective immediately, all controlling interests have been moved into the name of Jenna Harrow. Gasps echoed across the room. Real ones this time. My father stood abruptly. That's not possible, he said, voice shaking slightly. She's been removed from all... No, mister, Grayson interrupted. She was never removed. The power of attorney you filed was invalid. The doctor listed was not qualified to issue a mental fitness affidavit. The court was informed, and the trust's override clause was triggered. He turned to me. Jenna, you are now the majority shareholder of Harrow Holdings. This includes full title to the resort and all associated assets. I didn't speak right away. I didn't need to. Just standing there with the folder in my hands was enough. Zach stared at me like he didn't know who I was, like I'd grown a second face. My mother stepped forward, fingers tight around her clutch. You think this little stunt will make you family again? I looked at her, not with hate, not even anger, just clarity. You threw me out for defending him, I said. You humiliated your own father in front of strangers. And now you're surprised that the truth chose to come home with me. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. My father said this will ruin everything we've built. No, I said. You ruined it the moment you decided that legacy was more important than love, that appearances mattered more than the people behind them. Zach stepped forward. Jenna, come on. This isn't how we do things. You mean quietly? I asked, behind lawyers and signatures and lies. His expression twisted into something unfamiliar. I saw him for what he really was, someone who never had to earn a seat, because it was always reserved for him. You never asked why I stopped coming around, I said to all of them. You never wondered why I RSVP'd no so many times. You just assumed I didn't care. But the truth is, I got tired of begging to exist. My voice didn't tremble. I didn't raise it, but every word landed with weight. Then Grandpa stepped beside me. For years, I thought keeping peace meant staying quiet, he said. But silence only ever protected the wrong people. He looked around the room. Today, we end that. Mr. Grayson stepped forward again, holding out one last envelope. This is the deed to the property, he said. Signed and sealed. I reached for it. My hands didn't shake. You can keep your toasts, I said softly. I'll take the land. And with that, I turned Grandpa at my side. Behind us, no one clapped. No one cheered. But something broke open in the silence, a reckoning. And that was enough. It's been 3 months. The snow that dusted the mountaintops that night has long melted. And the garden that once sat unused behind the Aspen Ridge Resort is now bursting with rosemary thyme and early blush roses. I planted them myself, knees in the dirt, hands blistered, heart full. I didn't change the name of the resort. Not yet. But I've added something. A brass plaque at the entrance reads, The Harrow Garden Project. For those who remember. It's not for tourists. It's not even on the website. It's for the ones who come looking for silence, for something slower than the world allows. Grandpa still visits on Fridays. He walks slower now, but there's more ease in his step. We sit on the wooden bench near the citrus trees, sharing stories over coffee and whatever baked thing I've managed not to burn that week. He calls it our little rebellion. Some nights I walk alone between the cabins and the pines, the sky so full of stars, it feels like the world is finally breathing again. It doesn't feel haunted anymore. It feels lived in, softened by truth. Zach hasn't spoken to me since the wedding. He sent one text a week after it all happened. It said, You went too far. I didn't reply. Because no, I didn't go too far. I went far enough. My mother moved back to the city. Word spread among her social circles just enough to dent her reputation, but not enough to destroy it. She'll rebuild, she always does. But this time I won't be the one she calls when the lights flicker. My father mailed a letter. It wasn't an apology, just a list of clarifications that sounded like excuses. I didn't answer, because some things don't need closure. They just need distance. I've hired new staff people who grew up here, who know what it means to work with the land. One of them, Elise, showed me how to graft apple branches last week. We laughed until we cried when the hose slipped and soaked us both. It felt like something healed in that moment. Quiet, unannounced. There's still a lot to do. The old cabins need insulation. The vineyard fencing is warped. The accounting system is prehistoric. But it's mine, and it's real. Some days I still wake up expecting it all to vanish. But then I see Grandpa's handkerchief on the nightstand, or the deed tucked inside my desk drawer, or the little grapevine pin I found in one of Grandma's old keepsake boxes. And I remember this isn't a dream. This is the life that waited for me when I finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. Last week I found a letter from Grandma buried inside a tin box in the garden shed. It was wrapped in linen and tied with string, the handwriting unmistakable. It said, If you're reading this, then the land has found its way home again. I sat on the garden bench and wept, not from grief, but from recognition. She knew. She always knew I'd come back not to take revenge, not to punish, but to restore. And that's what this is, not a victory. A restoration of story, of soil, of self. Tonight there's a community dinner on the ridge. No cameras, no speeches. Just people and bread and songs and stories shared under paper lanterns. Before guests arrive, I'll light the small candle in the corner of the garden, where a stone now sits with a simple carving. For Walter and Carmen, who remembered what mattered, I'll stand there a moment longer, not to reflect on the pain, but to say thank you to the truth, to the land, and to the quiet strength that brought me back here whole.